Entering Kenmore. Doors will open on the left.
What's up, everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of the crossover of your dreams, Ramble On and Entering Kenmore. I'm joined, as always, by my two co-hosts, David Azer and George Gabra. First episode, we previewed the AL Central, and in this one, we're going to be going over one of the more fun divisions. Kind of bored you to tears with the first one, so now we're going to go with a fun one with the NL East. But how are you guys doing on this Tuesday afternoon?
Pretty good. Looking forward to getting into, like you said, a division that has probably a little more interestingness to it. We went over the AL Central, kind of just bashed the Twins for a lot of that. And I'm looking forward to breaking down this division that I think has a few exciting teams in there.
I'm doing fantastic. This is definitely a more exciting division. You have three teams that not only can win the division, but I think you have three teams who can win the pennant in the National League and make a run at the World Series. So should be a lot of fun. We do have two bottom feeders in this division with the Nationals and the Marlins, but the other three teams, the Braves, the Mets, and the Phillies, definitely all title contenders. So it should be a fun episode to discuss those teams.
Let's dive right into it with the worst team in this division, coming in at plus 10,000 to win the NL East with a win total set at 64.5, is the Washington Nationals, who, after rebuilding from that 2019 World Series run, once again find themselves rebuilding. They saw Mackenzie Gore go out the door this offseason in a prospect-laden package headlined by 2025 first-round pick Gavin Feen, Devin Fitzgerald, Alejandro Rosario, and someone who I think is going to be their starting first baseman for the bulk of this year in Abimelec Ortiz. But what do you guys got on the rebuilding Nats?
I think the biggest addition for the Nats this offseason was Paul Taboni coming over from the Red Sox and kind of rebuilding their rebuild. Like you said, it's kind of funny that after 2019, we were interested to see how the Nats would come back from that. And it was just a full rebuild and selling off Trey Turner, Max Scherzer, and basically everyone else under the sun over there. Now they're doing it again. I think there are some bright spots in this lineup in James Wood, where last year he really burst onto the scene, showing off that power. But besides him and CJ Abrams, there's really no one in this lineup that gets the juices flowing. I think Dylan Cruz really kind of dampened expectations in year one, or a full season in year one. So I'm looking for him to bounce back. I think it helps that there's really no expectations for this team and this lineup. You also have Josiah Gray coming back, and when he was healthy, he wasn't great for the Nationals so far, so we'll see if he can rebound. But aside from that, there's just really nothing to looking through this rotation. Like Miles Michaelis is going to get innings. Poor Nationals fans. That's unfortunate. I know, George, you probably have experience with him in the NL Central, so maybe you can speak a little bit more on that. But yeah, overall, not much to take away from this Nationals roster in general. I think, like I said, there are some bright spots that I'll look forward to watching, but I'm not expecting much from this team.
I'm in the same boat, not expecting much from this team. I do think they're going to finish in last place in this division. This is a team that has been rebuilding since 2019 when they won that World Series title, and they just seem to trade once they get a good player. Like Mackenzie Gore had a fantastic season last season. It's, well, let's ship them out for more prospects. And prospects. That is going to work, but you got to let these guys get up and got to let them develop and get to the big league level, and they just haven't had consistency in that department. I know David, you just mentioned James Wood and CJ Abrams, two guys who have really come onto the scene, two guys who are all-star caliber players, and two guys who came over in the Juan Soto trade. Those are the two headliners here. I'm looking forward to seeing what those guys are going to do. Wood, I think, is going to have a fantastic year, hit for a lot of power. And Abrams, if he can stay away from the casino in Chicago late night or anywhere, he should be very good as well. And Dylan Cruz hurt last year a lot of the season, but a guy coming out of college who had a lot of expectations, high draft pick. I think he's going to bounce back, but this pitching rotation is just god-awful. Miles Michaelis, you mentioned it as well, David, but former Cardinal. I think he's over the hill. Josiah Gray, a guy they got from the Dodgers in the Max Scherzer, Trey Turner trade, also been hurt. So just nothing to really get you excited about this rotation. They're going to give up a lot of runs. Even if that offense with Wood and Abrams at the top are able to produce, they're going to have to score a lot of runs because that rotation is going to give up a lot of runs.
Yeah, a couple guys I wanted to highlight that you guys didn't hit on yet. Robert Hassel, prospect coming over in the Juan Soto trade. Got a cup of coffee last year and was all right. Obviously, he's a big power guy, so this is a guy that they're going to look to produce some runs for them on offense. But last year in that cup of coffee, 70 games, it was a 30.1% strikeout rate and only a 223 batting average, which is much higher than his minor league averages. Obviously, before getting called up, it was only a 17.3% strikeout rate and a 10.6% walk rate, both of which dropped. Well, I guess dropped in terms of the walk rate all the way down to 3.9. Strikeout rate jumps up 13% all the way up to 30, and he only popped 3 home runs in his time in Washington. And then I mentioned him, kind of an underrated piece of that Mackenzie Gore deal in Abimelec Ortiz, who was Rangers. Sorry, I couldn't think of their name. 28th ranked prospect, first baseman, but when you look at his prospect savant page, there's a lot of red on there, a lot to like about him. Walked at a 12.7% clip in AAA last year. Did strike out a fair bit at 21.8, but it was 58th percentile, so nothing that you're really beating yourself up over. But he makes his hay hitting the ball really hard. 91st percentile max EV at 112.7. His 50th percentile exit velocity was 95.7, ranking him in the 95th percentile. This is a guy that I think is going to contribute a fair bit for them this year, because when you look at their first base depth chart, I mean, when you look at this depth chart from top to bottom, it's brutal, except really in the outfield. But last year was Andres Chaparro doing the bulk of the work for them over there after they designated Nate Lowe for Red Sox legend Nate Lowe for assignment last year. So I think Ortiz is going to have a big year for them. A couple other guys, Brady House, first rounder in 2021. He also has big power for this team. So far in the spring, he's hitting .500 with 2 home runs. Only 5 games played, obviously, so not to be small sample size Sammy on that one. But that's kind of what I do when talking about prospects. In AAA, it was 13 bombs, good for a Zach versus Math, first edition of this one, 892 OPS in AAA. So I'm looking to him to have a bounce back year, still only 22 years old. So he's a breakout candidate. And then on the rotation side, it is a deserted wasteland there, except for one guy, and that is Cade Cavalli, 2020 first rounder, 20th overall pick. Hasn't really been able to put the pieces together yet. I believe he was hurt for a bulk of last season, made only 10 starts. Had a 4.25 ERA, but I think he's going to start to put the pieces together and show you why he was a first-round pick. He's getting up there in age, obviously now at age 27, but as I like to say on Entering Kenmore, development isn't linear. So Cade Cavalli is, I think, the one maybe bright spot in this Nationals rotation. Otherwise, it is going to be really bleak for them and trying to get outs. James Wood is going to have to break the home run record. CJ Abrams is going to have to hit 407, and Dylan Cruz is going to have to show why he was the number 2 overall pick right behind his teammate Paul Skeens in 2023 for this team to have any sort of success.
One more guy I wanted to mention is Harry Ford, who came over in the Jose A. Ferrer trade. I might have pronounced that wrong.
Who could forget it?
Yeah, coming over from the Mariners. Obviously, he was blocked there as a catcher, and they have the home run king, Cal Raleigh. So I'm interested to see if he factors in at all this year, because he's been kind of a highly regarded prospect throughout his development. And obviously with the Nationals banking on Keibert Ruiz, who has not panned out at all since coming over from the Dodgers, I wonder if Ford gets some run this year and maybe he makes an impact. But past that, like you said, the rotation isn't great. They took a flyer on Foster Griffin from the NPB, not expecting a whole lot from him. I added him to my dynasty team, just hoping that something hits. But I'm not super high on that, not super high on this team at all. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is room for guys to jump up into this rotation, whether it be Luis Perales, a guy that Paul Taboni targeted from the Red Sox in exchange for Jake Bennett. He does have a fair bit of reliever risk because he throws super hard, but hasn't really regained that control since Tommy John, which kept him out most of last season. But control's usually the last thing to come back, so we'll see where Perales landed. But he's an intriguing arm there, and then obviously they have guys Jake Irvin and Mitchell Parker who have gotten major league reps for them in the past, so those are two spots that they could slide into that rotation. But even so, like prospect with big time reliever risk, and then two guys that we've already seen at the big league level and are nothing really to write home about. Like I said, this team is going to be really, really bad, especially in the run prevention category. So I don't know if you guys have anything else on this. I think this is clear cut the worst team in this division.
Yep, I don't. Definitely the worst team in the division, I think, by a good amount.
All right, so we'll keep on trucking through. We get to one of the more fun teams from last year, made a late push to the playoffs that ultimately fell short. The Miami Marlins, they're coming in at plus 4,000, which is crazy that the Nationals are plus 10,000, then the next closest team is 4,000. Win total set at 72.5. Brought in Owen Casey from your Cubs, George, in exchange for Edward Cabrera. Signs Pete Fairbanks after he was let go by Tampa. And another Cubs legend, Christopher Morel, coming in. They lost Ryan Weathers in a deal with the Yankees for a prospect package. But what do you guys got on the Marlins?
Like some of these pieces, I think they're similar to the White Sox, where I enjoy watching the good players on this team in Xavier Edwards, Otto Lopez, two guys who steal a lot of bags. And Kyle Stowers kind of broke on last year. I know he tailed off a bit towards the end of the year, but had an all-star season. And Jacob Marcy broke out in the second half of last year. The problem is, are they ever going to spend the money to supplement this young core? I don't see it with this current regime. I don't think it's ever going to happen. Looking at the rotation, obviously they didn't trade Sandy last year. He's had a couple down years in a row since the Cy Young Award season. Past him, you got Yuri Perez, who I think could be a bright spot in this rotation, but Chris Paddock getting key innings for this team is not going to be great. And then you have Braxton Garrett and Max Meyer, both prospects who I think Garrett had a little bit of success in 2024 and then got hurt. So interested to see if he can bounce back. But like I said, there's some interesting names here, but I don't think they're contending for the division either. I have them in fourth place. I don't think they can be nearly as bad as the Nationals will be, but I'm not expecting a whole lot from this team either.
I'm also not expecting a lot from the Fish. This is a team, one of many teams in Major League Baseball that do not spend any money. They have a terrible owner, and that's why they're always trading away any guy who gets good to get prospects, and it just kind of seems like an endless cycle for them. The two guys on offense that I am looking for here, Kyle Stowers, he had a great year coming over from Baltimore in the trade with Trevor Rogers. He hit for a lot of power. Excited to see how he capitalizes on that. Augustin Ramirez had a great year for them as well. And then I guess three guys that I want to capitalize on here. Owen Casey coming over in the trade with Edward Cabrera from Chicago. Casey was a top prospect, a guy that the Cubs did not want to trade at last year's deadline. They held on to him, and that is part of the reason why I think they lost to the Brewers in that NLDS series, and they decided to cut bait with him this year. Casey, he's a guy who is very talented, a lot of hype around him. I think he's going to have a good year. We'll see how he does in that lineup in a big pitcher's park in Miami. And then the rotation, the two guys obviously that stand out, Sandy Alcantara, after the Tommy John surgery he had coming off his Cy Young victory, has not been the same guy, but maybe a couple years removed from that and a full offseason to really get fully healthy, even though he was fully healthy last year. But to have that arm be as healthy as it has been in a while, I think that's going to be big. And then Yuri Perez, tall. If he can stay healthy, I think he's going to strike a lot of people out and be a nice 1-2 punch here for the Fish. But this is a team that I do not see going to the playoffs. I think that win total is right around right. I think they're going to win about 70 games or so, and that's about it. That's just what the Marlins do every year. They're never the worst team in baseball, but they're never good enough to compete because they just don't spend any money.
Yeah, the two things that I want to talk about on the offensive side before we get into the pitching and, surprise, surprise, prospects, which is my favorite thing to talk about. Kyle Stowers last year against lefties really kind of tailed off. It was a 253 batting average with a sub 700 OPS, coming in at 682. So not completely awful, but he hit 25 home runs on the year last year, 24 of those 25 coming against right-handed pitching, only hitting the one against lefties. He only tallied 23 total hits on the season in 91 ABs against lefties. So can he prove that he is more than just a platoon bat? And then Agustin Ramirez kind of fell off towards the end of the season. Obviously, he came out of the gates really hot. First half hit 242 with a 759 OPS, and then in the second half of the year, 65 games played, it dropped down to a 219 batting average with a 637 OPS. So can he put together a full season? And not for nothing, he does have Joe Mack, who's a really solid defensive catcher and appears to be the Marlins' plan at catcher. He's ready to come up to go over to first base where they currently have Liam Hicks, but then again, it's so much more pressure on your bat when you're playing first base. Over on the prospect side, two guys looking to come up into this rotation because there are a couple organizations, the Brewers, the Guardians, the Rays are another one, where it just seems like they always have incredible pitching prospects, and the Marlins definitely fall into that category. George, you mentioned Yuri Perez, Sandy Alcantara, who they got from the Cardinals and then developed, and then, of course, Edward Cabrera, who we're going to be seeing pitch for your Cubs this year. But they have two top pitching prospects, starting off with the top prospect in their organization, Thomas White, big lefty. He's known for a super flat fastball that's able to keep hitters off balance, and then a really solid curveball to pair with it. Got up to AAA last year after starting the season in High A. We should see him this year. I know he just hit a little bit of a setback with a quad strain that shut him down for a couple weeks, so probably any hopes of him pitching his way onto this major league roster have been evaporated with that injury. And then another lefty, Robbie Snelling, who came over from the Padres in, I'm not sure what trade that would have been. Trying to think. Padres and
Tanner Scott, maybe?
It must have been. That's the only
That
one
sounds
I can think
right.
of. Yeah, but again, Robbie Snelling, he's a little bit more of a polished prospect, a little bit older than White by just a year. So 22 years old. Again, he crossed two levels last year, AA and AAA. Once he jumped up to AAA, he was really good in 63 and 2/3 innings, good for a 1.27 ERA, holding opponents to just a 2.03 batting average. This is a guy that I think could crack this opening day starting rotation. When you look at some of the names in there, whether it be you mentioned Chris Paddock or Braxton Garrett, I just feel like that's a better spot for one of your top prospects that you've had knocking down the door for quite a while and raises the ceiling quite a bit. I don't think this is a playoff team. Maybe they get hot towards the end of the season like they did last year and make a late push for it, but overall it's just not a team that I think there's too much to be excited about unless you're talking about those couple prospects.
You guys both said it. This team tends to hang around, but more often than not, we see them selling at the deadline. So even if they are a little bit competitive, I think they'll probably end up dumping some of their key guys for prospects like we always see. It's unfortunate because I think this team could be a lot of fun, but it's just we're never going to see the financial commitment from this ownership. And if you want to get mad at the Dodgers for ruining baseball, then you have to look at teams like this as well, who just refuse to spend money to stay competitive in these divisions. And while it's a division with a lot of firepower, I think the Marlins are still a step behind the top contenders of this team. I don't see how a playoff appearance is going to happen in this division and the National League in general.
I don't see it either. It's you mentioned it with the Dodgers, a team that everybody says is ruining baseball, and that's a bunch of BS. They spend money like every team should, and you got the Marlins, the Pirates, the A's, teams that just refuse to spend money, and it just hurts the product in general. Teams that have these low of payrolls that just don't spend on anybody whatsoever. It's it's sad, and that's why we're headed for a lockout, and that's a decision. That's a discussion for another day. But that's why the Marlins are the Marlins. They're always a team that has some exciting young players, but aside from the 2 years when they won the World Series, they have not done anything as a franchise since.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem. Like you said, that's why we're heading to a lockout, because these owners are refusing to spend money and refusing to open up the checkbooks. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but of course we've seen the graph go around for the last year and a half of the spending to payroll, and we're seeing the same teams towards the bottom of that list in percentage turned over into their next team. And it's always it's been the Red Sox and the Cubs the last couple of years in the high 20s, but it's the Marlins, it's the Rays, it's the Pirates, it's these owners that simply just want to make as much money as possible, which I understand it's a business, but it's bad for the sport. And instead of putting their foot down against these owners, it seems like Rob Manfred and the rest of the league are going to bend the knee and let these guys cater to baseball. But I think that's a conversation for another day, which I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to get into starting on December 2nd or whatever the day the lockout starts is, because then we can start doing our KBO preview podcasts.
I can't wait for that.
So yeah, I think we're all on the same page with the Marlins here. Might as well get into the fun part of the division, starting off with the Atlanta Braves, who just made some news about half hour before we jumped on to this episode, with Jurickson Profar getting suspended for the full 162 game season for testing positive for performance-enhancing drugs for the second time. They come into things, I guess I'll get an updated total now that we have this news. They were plus 220 to win the NL East, with a win total coming in at 88.5. They now sit at, let's see, good radio. They now sit at plus 250, so 30-cent movement on their odds to win the division. Key additions: Robert Suarez, Raisel Iglesias, they brought back, Mauricio Dubon, Mike Yastrzemski, Jonah Heim, and Jorge Mateo. Marcelo Zuna headed off to Pittsburgh to join the Pirates. Nick Allen and Pierce Johnson also went out the door. But what do you guys got on the Braves?
The main concern with me for the Braves has kind of always been health since they won in 2021. It's been that same problem with the pitching staff. Chris Sale, in his first season with the team, won a Cy Young that he was chasing throughout his entire career up to that point. But then last year, he had, I think it was a rib cage injury where he missed some time with that. And when he was there, he pitched well, but you also have, I think Schwellenbach is already on the shelf, or one of their other guys is already set to miss time to start this year. I know Ronaldo Lopez is also another one of those guys who's on the mend still and won't be ready for opening day. So the rotation concerns me a bit. I know they have a lot of pitching depth, and a lot of that depth has shined when given the opportunity, but they just made a lot of depth moves this offseason. They didn't really go for it in a division that I think is slowly becoming more winnable when we'll get to some of these other teams. Ronald Acuna is always going to be great, but the injury concerns are there with him too. He's suffered ACL tears in both knees now throughout his career. He came back and looked good last year, but the speed took a little bit of a hit. Obviously, the stolen bases dropped off a lot in his limited season last year. We'll see if a full healthy offseason fixes some of that, but I just don't see how the Braves can make it back to the playoffs if they're already dealing with these injuries, and it doesn't seem like there's an end in sight. I know like the 49ers had some weird conspiracy, like we're practicing outside of some, like, what was it, like a power grid, and fans were like, oh, we need to move the practice facility because of that. Maybe the Braves have something going on like that too in spring training. I don't know what it is, but until they can stay healthy and maybe prove me wrong, I just don't see how they can make the playoffs this year in a pretty loaded division.
For me, it's three guys that are going to be the make it or break it for this team, and they're coming off bad seasons. Ozzie Albies, Austin Riley, and Spencer Strider. They all had bad 2025 campaigns, and it led to a bit of a down year for Atlanta. if those guys can bounce back and be the players that they have been before 2025, I really like the Braves' chances not only to make the playoffs, but possibly win this division. They're going to be duking it out with the Mets and the Phillies, two other very talented teams in the division. But if those guys can bounce back, I really like Atlanta's chances. Ronald Acuna Jr., I haven't been a fan of his since the old 40-70, that fake record where it's a big game against my Cubs and Cubs are fighting for their lives and he grabs the base like he's Ricky Henderson in a tie game in the ninth inning for stealing 70 bases. Congrats for that. But a guy who's been hurt perennially throughout his career, he's torn his ACL twice. If he's healthy, he's one of the best players in baseball, and he's one of the most exciting players in baseball, a five-tool guy. It's just unfortunate that he has not been healthy for a lot of his big league career. Drake Baldwin was fantastic his rookie year last year, even though I don't think he should have won the Rookie of the Year in the National League. But a really young, exciting player that the Braves have there at the catcher position. And then the pitching rotation. They've got a lot of good pitchers, a lot of guys who can perform really well, but a lot of injuries there. And Chris Sale and Spencer Strider, two guys who are healthy right now, have been known to deal with injuries throughout their career. And if those guys can stay healthy, I think that's one of the best 1-2 punches in baseball. But again, it's the health. If they can do that, we shall see. And the bullpen, they've got a really nice 1-2 punch there. Raisel Iglesias, Robert Suarez, who's been fantastic for the Padres over the last couple of seasons. I believe he led the league in saves last year, if I'm not mistaken. Last year, 2024, I believe he did. That's once you get to the eighth inning, when you got to go up against those two guys, that's going to be tough to beat. I'm very high on this Braves team. A lot of it comes down to guys bouncing back or not, and if they can stay healthy. But if those guys that I mentioned can bounce back and they can stay healthy, I think they're going to win the division.
Yeah, it's all going to come down to the pitching for this Braves team. Obviously, you're looking for a bounce back season out of Ozzie Albies, who was pretty bad last year. You're going to be missing Sean Murphy up until sometime in May with a torn labrum in his hip, which I thought was in your shoulder, but that goes to show you how much I know. But obviously, it makes it a little bit better, a little bit easier of a pill to swallow losing someone like Murphy when you have the reigning NL Rookie of the Year in Drake Baldwin. You mentioned him, George. Michael Harris is a guy, Rookie of the Year in his own right, who kind of has fallen off a little bit offensively since then, but again, one of the best defensive center fielders in baseball. So I'm not really concerned about the Braves on the offensive side, but you have Chris Sale and then pretty much a bunch of question marks. I know we talked about Spencer Strider, but he's seeing a pretty big dip in his velocity, only touching 91 in his first spring training outing, which I know you can say, like, oh, it's spring training. Why are we overreacting to that? But this is a now 4-year drop off in velocity from Strider from when he first burst onto the scene. And it's definitely at least a little bit concerning. The fastball shape was back to where it was, but if you're working with the same fastball shape at 91, it's definitely going to look different than it coming in at 99, which of course at his peak is where he was at. So how he continues to recover from the numerous injuries last year in the last couple years is something to keep an eye on. Then again, after that, we're talking about Reynaldo Lopez, Grant Holmes, and Bryce Elder, who are just really nothing to write home about. Obviously, they have this great young stable of arms, and Spencer Schwellenbach, AJ Smith-Shawver, Hurston Waldrop, all just guys that we've seen play Major League Baseball for them before we even get into the prospect side of it all. But they just can't get them to stay healthy. All three of those guys in Schwellenbach, Smith-Shawver, and Waldrop are going to miss the entirety of the season. So it's just, where do you rely on to get outs? They do have a couple guys in the farm system that I wanted to highlight at the starting position, starting with Didier Fuentes. He's debuted. I believe he got a cup of coffee with them last year. J.R. Ritchie is a guy we just saw pitch against the Red Sox the other day, had a really strong first inning, but then a second inning kind of started to falter just a little bit. And then Owen Murphy, 2022 first round pick, of the Braves, so all non-roster invitees. So I think they're going to be leaning on some of these young guns a little bit more than they were hoping for. And as we know with some of these young pitchers, I think we see it more so with hitters, but we definitely see it with pitchers too, where if you don't have more than 1 or 2 pitches that can really generate outs, then you're going to struggle after your first couple starts. So whether or not these guys can come up and be immediate impact guys is something that I'm keeping my eye on. And I think the Braves situation this year and their success this season is really going to hinge on those guys' abilities to perform, because we already know what Reynaldo Lopez, Grant Holmes, and Bryce Elder are, and they're league average players.
That's kind of for me why I can't put this team higher than third. And honestly, I'm a Braves guy. I hope they prove me wrong. There's a lot of players on this team I enjoy watching, but until proven otherwise, I just don't believe that this team can stay healthy enough to sustain a full season and make a deep playoff run. Like, already looking at their spring training roster, they brought in Martin Perez and Carlos Carrasco as non-roster invitees. So that kind of shows you how they feel about their pitching depth at this point and all the injury concerns. Ultimately, I don't see either of those guys making the team, but it's just like, where is this depth coming from if these guys can't stay healthy? And if you go into the season with Chris Sale and Spencer Strider as your 1-2 punch, we haven't seen them stay healthy and play a full 162 in some time now. So it's just hard for me to, stake my claim and say that this team is making it back to the playoffs, when we'll get to some other teams who I think have more talent and a little bit more certainty, as we've been saying, on entering Kenmore heading into next season.
It sounds like I'm certainly the highest on Atlanta out of the three of us. I do think that they have a very good roster. I do think if they can stay healthy and they can kind of bounce back from some disappointing campaigns last year, they will be a lot better than they were in 2025 and will be back in the playoffs. But a lot of that hinges on them playing better and them staying healthy. So we'll see, but I am excited about this Braves team coming up this season.
Yeah, and I mean, even looking at some of those guys I mentioned in J.R. Ritchie and Owen Murphy and Didier Fuentes, it's just like there's some concerning stuff in their profiles too. Like, for example, J.R. Ritchie, he missed the entirety of, or most of, 2023 with Tommy John, and when he returned in 24, he looked really good. And then last year he was all right. The results were 140 innings, 2.64 ERA with a 9 K per 9 and a 3.47 walks per 9, which, like I said when talking about Luis Perales, was the command is the last thing to come back. But then he spiked, it was a 384 FIP and a 215 BABIP. So it's looking like he got a little bit lucky on some of those stats. So, like, is he closer to a 3.8 guy in AAA? Is that a guy that can contribute in the major leagues this year? I don't know. I like the profile and I like the player. It's just I don't know how much a team that's supposedly contending can rely on these guys who are pretty much question marks. It's too many question marks for me at the win total at 88.5 and now plus 250 to win the division. It's just, I don't know. I'm having a hard time seeing this as a team that can compete with specifically the Mets, because we're going to get into the Phillies and I'm not super high on them either as we shift gears into that, if you guys don't have anything else on the Braves.
All good.
All right, so we can dive into the Phillies. I teased it on the last episode, but these three teams, the Braves, Phillies, and Mets, are all separated by a total of 3 wins on their total. Braves at 88.5, and now the Phillies at 89.5, plus 195 to win the division. They added Brad Keller from the Cubs and Adolis Garcia from the Rangers. They also retained JT Realmuto, and they lost Ranger Suarez, Matt Strahm in a trade with the Royals. They just recently released Nick Castellanos, and Harrison Bader went over to the Giants. But David, what do you got on the Phillies?
Yeah, call me crazy. It kind of feels like this World Series window is slowly closing for the Phillies. They're just getting another year older, and I think Ranger Suarez is a key loss that maybe we're not talking about enough. Obviously, they had to re-sign Kyle Schwarber, and they got it done. He hit, 56 homers, I think, last year, so the power will always be there, and I think pissing off Bryce Harper can only help them, but I do worry a little bit about the drama of this clubhouse. Like, they got Nick Castellanos out of there, and his exit was a little interesting. He posted, it looked like he wrote it on a napkin, saying what happened and why he was no longer.
He did the Bill Belichick, I resign as HC of NYJ.
Yeah, so I don't know what to make of this team. Like, I think losing Ranger Suarez is key. Can Andrew Painter factor in at all? I know he's been hyped up for a while now, and we haven't seen him make his major league debut. I think if it were to happen, it would probably be more so like halfway through the year. So can they stay afloat until then? I don't know. They made the World Series in 2022. Since then, it's been a lot of losses to the Dodgers in the playoffs, and I just don't think they've done enough. Like, people thought maybe they would land Bo Bichette, some of these other guys to help supplement their lineup in some key spots. Like Bryson Stott hasn't exactly panned out. Alec Boehm had a down year. You thought maybe they could supplement the infield in some way to bump up that production, but it never really happened. You brought in Brad Keller, Adolis Garcia, and re-signed JT Realmuto after losing out on Ranger Suarez, which is certainly a pivot, not one I would have made, but it's kind of hard to make something of this team. They've kind of been doing the same thing for the last few years, and they decided to run it back once again. I just don't see how that really helps you in a loaded National League.
Yeah, and I mean Andrew Painter, who you mentioned, is kind of at a fork in the road type season for him. He's coming back from the Tommy John surgery, but last year the results were not very good in 106 and 2/3 innings. It was a 5.40 ERA. The FIP was a little bit better at 4.90, but this is a guy who going into the year, 2 years ago, was regarded as the best pitching prospect in baseball. So, and the shine has definitely worn off on him a little bit. He got hit really hard in AAA last year, 42nd percentile in that regard. 37.8 of the hits against him were coming off the bat at, I think it's a 95 plus, qualifies as a hard hit. Getting barreled up, the strikeouts were down, the walks still remained at a fairly palatable number at 9.7%, and he was still generating a lot of swing in zone, but again, like, it's getting hit. So what can he do to kind of bounce back and prove that he still is one of the top prospects in baseball? But I agree, like you said, losing Ranger Suarez is just kind of getting brushed off, I think, a lot by Phillies fans because of the health issues. He had never pitched above, 140 innings in a season. When you look at the rest of their rotation, you have Christopher Sanchez, who finished in second or third, top three in Cy Young voting last year. So he's your bona fide ace. But then after that, you have Aaron Nola, who was awful after signing that big deal in free agency. Jesus Luzardo, who is always going to be a guy who has peaks and valleys. He's going to look for 2 weeks like he's one of the best 10 pitchers in baseball. And then for another 2 weeks, he'll look absolutely atrocious. And then you have Zach Wheeler, who at one point was one of the best pitchers in baseball, coming off of blood clot surgery where he had to get a rib removed and kept the rib. I don't know if you guys saw that he said he kept the rib that was removed.
I
So
did see that.
what are you going to get from him? And then aside from that, Taijuan Walker, who was so bad for you last year, you bumped him to the bullpen. So I don't know. I have questions about all these teams in the NL East. It's a fun division, but I feel like some of these markets are getting priced a little bit too rich for my blood.
I think this Phillies team, from what they have been, the expectations from 2023 to 2025, the expectations are definitely not as high as they have been. They went to the World Series as, I believe, the last seed in the National League at the wild card, the sixth or the third wild card out of three that year, wound up going to the World Series. And then they take the league by storm the next year. They're one of the favorites in the National League, and they blow that 3-2 series lead to Arizona. And then they don't do it in 24. And last year they lose to the Dodgers in heartbreaking fashion with Kerkering throwing that ball away. So this is a team where I think they can still definitely win the World Series. They're good enough to do just that. But the expectations for me are not as high as they have been in the past. I love Kyle Schwarber, former Cub. He is just so much fun to watch. He mashes the ball when he gets a hold of one. He is just, I mean, that ball goes flying. Trey Turner, really solid player. I think he's been a tad bit underwhelming during his time in Philadelphia. I know a lot of Phillies fans have not been super pleased with what he has done with the amount of money they're paying him, $300 million, but still a really nice player. And Bryce Harper, one of the best players in Major League Baseball, not according to the general manager, Dave Dombrowski. He's not a superstar. I think he's a superstar, though. So I'm expecting a big year out of Harper once again. And you guys mentioned it, Ranger Suarez, that's a big loss. He was fantastic for them last year. Zach Wheeler, we'll see how he does coming back off that surgery. He missed the end of last season. That was a huge loss. But if Wheeler can come back and be anywhere close to the Wheeler that he's been in the past, and Christopher Sanchez does what he did last year, that's another phenomenal 1-2 punch. And we'll see how Luzardo and Nola round out their rotation. Andrew Painter, a guy with a lot of hype, but a lot of these guys that come in from the minor leagues making their first go around in the major leagues, it doesn't usually go as a lot of people hope it will, because it's just so hard to adjust to the major league level as a pitcher. So I'm not super high on Painter this year. We'll see what he does. He could surprise a lot of people. And they do have one of the best closers in baseball in Johan Duran. He is fantastic. Just comes into the game, even if it's a 1-run lead, you're feeling pretty damn good if you're a Phillies fan going into the 9th inning with that guy back there. So this is a good team. I don't think the expectations are what they have been in the past, but I do expect the Phillies to make the playoffs this year.
The one thing I think you mentioned at the bullpen, that's what stands out to me. You mentioned Duran, but they also have Jose Alvarado, Brad Keller, who figured things out with the Cubs after the Red Sox weren't able to tweak things. Orion Kerkering, who obviously has to live with that just absolutely devastating error that cost the Phillies their season last year, but I think he's still a really good young relief arm that's going to contribute in a big way for them this year. And then even some of these names at the front end of their bullpen, whether it be Kyle Backus or Tanner Banks, they're no scrubs in their own right. So I think either one of those guys could step up and play a big role in this pen. But yeah, I think the window is slowly but surely closing on this Phillies team, which means that Dave Dombrowski is probably slowly but surely on his way out of town in Philly, because if there's one thing that we know about Dombrowski is that he's there to build winners, and once that window starts to close, owners are pretty quick to move on from him because he's not the guy to build up your farm system.
Yeah, I mean, you saw it with the Red Sox after 2018. They turned it over after Dave Dombrowski wasn't able to start the rebuild process. And now we are where we are as Red Sox fans. But on the Phillies, I don't think I have too much more to add. Like I said, they're just getting another year older. I think there are bright spots. They have enough to make it back to the playoffs, but I don't see this team as a true World Series contender, unfortunately. There's a lot of players I like watching. You said Kyle Schwarber. I'm a big Bryce Harper guy as well. I think he's going to prove Dombrowski wrong after those comments. He already came into spring training kind of heated about it. So I expect him to get into another gear here after kind of a down year last season. So I'm looking forward to watching the Phillies. I ultimately think they'll finish in second place, and we'll see what happens after that.
Bryce Harper really doesn't seem like the guy that you want to piss off if you're
No.
if you're Dave Dombrowski. But I mean,
Absolutely
maybe
not.
Dombrowski's he's a smart guy. He's built a winner, at least with the Red Sox. Obviously, we know he had all those great Tigers teams, but I feel like he might be a guy that's been around the block enough to know which guys you can kind of push their buttons a little bit and light a fire under them. And I feel like Bryce Harper might be one of those guys. I mean, obviously, he seems pretty pissed off about it, but maybe that's the intent that Dombrowski had. He wanted to piss him off and say, you know what, we're paying you however much money, like, you better go out there and perform like you're a superstar because you're getting paid like one. So I'm interested to see how that all pans out. I think it's going to work out in the Phillies' favor, though, because like I said, Bryce Harper does not seem like the kind of guy you want to piss off. Just ask Jonathan Papelbon. So that's the Phillies. We'll move on to the top team in the NL East by all projections. That is the New York Metropolitans, coming in at plus 170 to win the division. Win total set at 90.5. Obviously, things weren't working for them, so it was a big turnover offseason for the Mets. Brought in Freddie Peralta in a deal with the Brewers, signed Bo Bichette on what is effectively going to be a one-year prove-it deal with opt-outs. Jorge Polanco traded Marcus Semien for Brandon Nimmo, added Luis Robert from the White Sox, signed Devin Williams and Luke Weaver from the Yankees, and Tobias Myers also came over in that deal for Freddie Peralta. They lost Pete Alonso, Edwin Diaz, I mentioned it, Brandon Nimmo, Jeff McNeil, Brandon Sproat, Starling Marte, Luis Angel Acuna, and Tyler Rogers. What do you guys got on the new look Mets?
I mean, this is as big of a roller coaster offseason as I've pretty much ever seen. I think before the end of the new year, a lot of Mets fans were ready to get into doomsday scenario territory here after losing out on Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz. It was like, where do the Mets go from here? Then they started wheeling and dealing, and maybe it's blind optimism, but I kind of love this roster shift that they did in really one offseason. You move on from Jeff McNeil, Brandon Nimmo, Pete Alonso, Edwin Diaz, but you bring in a lot of quality replacements in Luis Robert Jr., Devin Williams even had a down year last year, but Luke Weaver as well, kind of just bringing in former Yankees, which they've done in the past. But I don't hate where the bullpen is at. I think the Phillies probably have a better bullpen. But looking at the rotation, I think there were a lot of bright spots last year. Obviously, you have Freddie Peralta to lead this new look staff, but then behind him, you have Nolan McLean and Clay Holmes, Sean Manaea. Can he bounce back? We'll see. But I like this rotation pretty much against any other rotation in this division, and the lineup with Marcus Semien. Jorge Polanco is not really a one-to-one replacement at first base for Pete Alonso, but I think they have enough power to get through this season, and they had to do something because the start to the Soto era was really underwhelming, and I think this is going to be a good team. I have them as my division winner. Again, call it blind optimism. The Mets kind of always find a way to crumble to the disdain of all the Mets fans around the world, but I'm high on them this year. I usually am. So I think they're going to win the division this year.
Mets do have one of my favorite team jingles in the league, the Meet the Mets, come on down and greet the Mets. And yeah, you guys said it, just so much turnover this offseason. They lost a lot of good players, but they also gained a lot of good players. Freddie Peralta, he is a true number one workhorse, ace type of pitcher. I saw him pitch so many times with the Milwaukee Brewers. He's got great stuff. He's going to be great for the front of that rotation. I believe they just recently named him as the opening day starter as well. So that was a good trade for the Mets. I think he's going to be fantastic. The front three in this lineup with Francisco Lindor, Juan Soto, and Bo Bichette is really, really good. That I don't think it's as good as the Dodgers' top three, or I guess you can call it top four, top five now with the superstars they have in their lineup. But those are three all-star players, including Juan Soto, who just signed that huge, massive, I think, $755 million contract over 15 years. He's just fantastic, got a great eye at the plate. I mean, he's fantastic. So that's a very good top three here for the Mets. Some depth there in the lineup as well. Semien coming off a bit of a down year with the Rangers, but I think he will bounce back in a nice way at Citi Field with this team. Losing Edwin Diaz and replacing him with Devin Williams. Williams coming off a bad year himself in New York. I don't know if the lights were too bright or whatever it was going from Milwaukee to New York to play for the Yankees, but we'll see if he can bounce back going to the other New York team. I just don't think he's as good as Edwin Diaz. The rotation after Peralta, Nolan McLean, he's got a ton of upside. I'm a big fan of his. Not a big David Peterson fan. And then Clay Holmes, he's showing to pitch pretty well as a starter, converting from a reliever, another guy who went from one New York team to another. So this is a Mets team where I think they have the most talent in the division, but it's the Mets. So I don't know. They always seem to screw it up. They always seem to not play to their potential, and they always seem to find a way to make their piss off their fans. So I'm not as high on the Mets as I think you guys are. They've obviously got a ton of talent, and they can certainly prove me wrong, but I just don't see the Mets winning the division. It's just because they're the Mets, and that might be a dumb reason because they do have the most talented roster in the division, and the odds makers say that, the data says that, the analytics say that, but the analytics doesn't add in the factor that they are the New York Mets. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if they prove me wrong, but I don't know. I'm not big on the Mets this year.
Yeah, you've heard me on Enter and Kenmore talk about Pete Alonso. He's one of my least favorite players in baseball. I think he is such a tool. And usually when...
Trace this. I don't know if you guys have seen that meme.
I have. Obviously, when things aren't working and you have this much money, as Steve Cohen does, into your lineup, you have to make major moves. And for the second straight offseason, it didn't seem like the Mets were particularly keen on bringing Alonso back. And ultimately, he walked to the Orioles. I think the biggest question for me is replacing him with Jorge Polanco, who's never played first base in his major league career. So that's certainly a decision. It's one that they're going with. They do have a good bit of insurance down in the minors in prospect Ryan Clifford, who they got from the Astros in the in the Justin Verlander trade a couple years back, non-roster invitee for them this year. I think if things don't go well defensively for Polanco early on to start the season, you're going to see him shift into maybe a super utility role, or maybe Brett Beatty's not swinging a good bat, so you move him into your DH role or something of the sort. But I do think that Ryan Clifford's going to be factoring in here sooner rather than later. Wasn't a fantastic number in 34 games at AAA after being promoted at the end of last season. Only a 219 batting average with a Zach versus math. 7 and change OPS 102 WRC plus, but he really tore the cover off the ball in AA before that promotion with a 148 WRC plus. 24 home runs. So power hitting first baseman, just a guy that you expect to start to get a cup of coffee at the big leagues, and especially if a guy who's never played the position in his big league career starts to falter early on, I think we could see them make the move there. They have so much pitching depth. I think one of the things that they addressed was that they had to rely so much on those young arms last year, whether it be Nolan McLean, who's currently the number 2 odds-on favorite to win NL Rookie of the Year behind only Connor Griffin, who is a super mutant, obviously. Jonah Tong, who people are calling Baby Lincecum, he was relied on a lot and was good in spurts, but also had his fair share of hiccups down the stretch. And then obviously Brandon Sproat, who was shipped off to Milwaukee in that Freddie Peralta deal. So obviously they sure things up a little bit more there, getting Freddie Peralta to be that workhorse at the front end of their rotation. And then hopefully McLean can develop into that frontline starter without having the pressure of having to be that frontline starter. We'll see what Kodai Senga can do for them. Obviously, I'm always super weary of guys coming over at age 30, whatever, from Japan. It just seems like those more often than not fail. I mean, obviously you have your Masahiro Tanaka examples, but I'm just more comfortable getting known commodities at this point, especially for a team like the Mets. But again, when this is a guy that's currently slated as your SP6 on Fangraphs roster resource, that's kind of a risk you're willing to take, because the peaks are going to be so high. Obviously, when he first came over in 2023, it was a sub-3 ERA with a 3.4 WAR. So if he can get closer to that point, or even last year, it was pretty serviceable in only 113 innings. It was a 3.02 ERA, but the strikeout, the K per 9 went way down. It was down to 8.66, while the walks were up to 4.37, which obviously is a huge drop from K's. He dropped almost 3 strikeouts on the K per 9 from 2023 to 25. So we'll see what they get there. I'm not super crazy about Sean Manaea. This is my pick to win the division, but it's just because I kind of feel like I said, all these teams I think are pretty overhyped in terms of value right now. They're all a little bit too rich for my blood. Obviously, you got some big name star power, some big baseball markets. So I'm gonna take the Mets, just gun to my head, in GTA. They're my pick to win the division, but I really could see any of these teams coming away with it. Obviously, they're all bunched up with between 3 wins, so I think it's whoever health favors is going to be the team to come out of it.
Yeah, for me, I think I'll just give my prediction for the standings here. I think I've got Atlanta. I think they're going to bounce back. Walt Weiss, I think he's going to do a good job. He's been the bench coach there for a while after Snitker retired, so I think that the Braves are going to have a good year. They're going to bounce back and win the division. I've got the Phillies coming in second. I've got them as a wild card team as well. The Mets I have in third place. I think it's a coin flip for me whether they're going to make the playoffs or not. I think it'd be between them or Milwaukee, because Milwaukee always finds a way. We'll get to that in another episode, but I got the Mets in third. I've got the Fish, the Marlins in fourth, and the Nationals. They might be one of the worst teams in the league. They are going to finish in the cellar here.
Yeah, David, you want to run through your predictions before we get out of here?
Yeah, honestly, I've been flip-flopping a little bit, but I'm just going to go with my gut here. I got the Mets winning the division and making a lot of my friends happy. We're going to go with the Phillies in second. I think they will be a wild card team again. But like I said, past that, I don't know how deep this team can go in the playoffs. The Braves, I'm going to put in third. I just think until they stay healthy, I can't pick them to make the playoffs again, because that is such a big looming concern in Atlanta right now. I'm going to go with the Marlins in fourth. Like I said, they're going to be fun to watch, but past that, they're not going to make any real noise this season. And like you guys said, the Nationals are in the cellar of the entire league, let alone just this division. So they will be comfortably in last place, I think.
Yeah, I've been flip-flopping a little bit too, but I'm going to go with what I have right now because, like I said, I think there are major questions about the rotations of the Braves and the Phillies. But I like the Braves offense just a little bit more just because of the star power that is Ronald Acuna Jr. So I got them finishing in second behind the Mets. The Phillies coming in third. I think I have more faith in the Braves young guys to come up and perform in that rotation than I do Andrew Painter and then kind of Aaron Nola bounce back. What do you get out of Zach Wheeler? All the things I talked about when we discussed them. I have the Marlins coming in a pretty distant fourth, and then the Nationals, of course, I think might rival the White Sox and Rockies of the last couple years as some of the worst teams that we've seen in quite a while. That pitching staff is just so bad, and it's hard to win ball games when you can't generate outs. And we'll talk about it in Entering Kenmore when we touch on the WBC coming up here. But there are a lot of teams that are going to struggle to get outs in the WBC, and the Nationals are no different on the Major League Baseball side. So I've got them in last and rivaling some of the worst teams we've seen in baseball ever. Any other closing thoughts on here on the NL East edition? We got the AL West coming up next. Me and David, as noted Mariners enjoyers, are excited for that
excited,
one.
Yes.
But AL West coming up next. But any closing thoughts on the NL East?
I don't think so. I think it'll be a more entertaining division than the AL Central. But past that, I'm also looking ahead to the AL West next time out here.
Yeah, it should be a fun division. Those top three teams in the division with Atlanta, New York, and Philadelphia should make for a great race come August and September. Yeah, it should be a very fun division, a lot of talent. So looking forward to watching these teams play.
Thank you so much for tuning in to part 2 of our MLB Division Series preview. Make sure to give us a follow on all of our social media platforms. You can find me at @co_Zach, David at DAzer27, and George at GGGabra on Twitter. Be sure to follow our podcast accounts. We're at Entering Kenmore on Twitter, and you can find me and George talking college hoops all through March on the Ramble On podcast. That's at Ramble On Pod on Twitter, and the handles are all the same on the rest of social medias, I believe, except for George, who is on TikTok at GGG Sports. So make sure to give him a follow there. Always breaking down all the biggest storylines across all the major sports and college athletics. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you previewing the AL West.